Always, always.
How's Mike today? Good. So we got Joe, nice Easter. I did. Good.
Rusty, though, you bring that one back in if you
I'm
would.
looking forward to mine.
There you go.
Saturday.
Yeah.
On Saturday. Oh, aren't you? Yeah, I'm going to.
So we got one short.
Is Joe not going to be here?
For newbies.
Yeah, we may not be, because I know you've been having some issues.
Okay. I'm just going to turn the camera away so I get more of the staff. Make sure Mr. Downs is in there.
One TV, not.
Yeah.
No matter what color, I get it from the council. It is.
Here's a slight hump for sure.
That's right.
And we'll do more in-depth introduction to ourselves and why we're here. If you just kick us off.
Yeah, we do have a microphone, laptop, because I wasn't doing that until that set up. Hey, Greg, would you do me a favor? Would you just stand that microphone up? Oh, where it went away?
April the 2nd, 2018, the work session of the City Council is now open, please. Rick?
I want to introduce two people who have been leading the courses, I guess, or the sessions we've been taking over the last several months that were sponsored by DOLA and I think CHOPA to some extent. And they're from LeBeau Development, and they're here to provide some information about permanent supportive housing. Feel free to ask them any questions you want, because they're the experts in the field as far as anybody in Colorado. So they should be able to respond to any questions at this time. So you can see these for your record. Something's not cooperating.
Well, the TVs are flickering on and on.
So we got Zoe and Katie.
Hi, everyone.
Hi. Welcome.
Thank you so much for having us. We're going to spend a little bit of time, if you'll indulge us, introducing ourselves and giving a little bit of our background so you have an understanding of why these two strange women are here in front of you. And you might know, I'm actually from Minnesota, some of you might have recognized the Canadian accent. I have been in Colorado for 4 years. I'm fairly new to the state, and this is my first time in Trinidad, and I'm absolutely in love with it, and I'm planning to take a vacation here. So nice to have all of you. This is a beautiful town. I love it, love it, love it. Carlos, we weren't sure if we should have believed Carlos, but he was so I'll go first because I'll try and not be too long-winded. So my name is Del LeBeau. I have been working around affordable and specifically permanent supportive housing, homeless housing in general for 25 years. I'm from Minnesota, but I've worked all over the country and have been in Colorado doing a lot of work here for about the last 4 years. I have a somewhat unique perspective in that I've done just about every aspect, although this morning when I was thinking about it, I was like, the only thing I have not been is a public official. So I can't say that I've walked in your shoes, but I've certainly worked with a lot of public officials and respect the work that you do, obviously. So I've done everything. I've done street outreach with homeless people, direct service, developed permanent supportive housing, ran property management companies, worked for a national nonprofit where, in Minnesota. And I'm from a community of about, depending on the year, somewhere between 80 and 90,000 people in Duluth, Minnesota. And I'm probably going to share with you a lot of experiences that I had there because that's really my hometown. But I worked all over the state of Minnesota for about 5 years, developing pipeline of permanent supportive housing with, again, rural communities to small towns, and then started working nationally and started doing this work all over the country. I've had my own small consulting company for the last 5 or 6 years or so, and was really brought into the state of Colorado by a national foundation called Enterprise Foundation, who said, hey, the state of Colorado outside of the metro area just discovered that they have homeless people in their communities. They did their first ever homeless surveys, and they have no idea what to do, and we think maybe you have the solution. So I met with a woman named Jen Lopez, who then went on to become the governor's, I don't even know her title, I always call her the governor's guru in homelessness. She's no longer with the governor's office, but she was there for 4 years. And her and I developed this permanent supportive housing toolkit, which a team from Trinidad went through. Our most diverse team ever, by the way. We've never had a librarian on our team, any of our teams before, and we rarely get public officials, so we really appreciated your team. Anyway, so we've been doing this work around the state of Colorado for about the last 4 years now, and through this process have created, and we're going to show you a slide that demonstrates this, have created 700 units of permanent supportive housing, plus a bunch more affordable across the state. And what I'm most proud of is that I would say only about a third of them were on the Front Range. The rest of them were really on the western end over the years. I work with Katie Simons, and I will turn it over to her to let her introduce herself.
All right, great, thank you. I'll put your in there. All right. So, thank you again for having us. We're really glad to be here. And I will apologize in advance. I'm fighting a little bit of a cold, so hopefully I make enough sense today and I'm coherent with what I say. But I've been working with myself for about 2 years. Prior to that, I've been working on homeless issues since about 2005. So I come at this from an education background. I worked in higher education and really looked at the issue of homelessness in terms of how an institution of higher education can address this issue, working in collaboration with cities and doing a lot of community development work. I then did work for the city of Denver for about 2 years doing street outreach as well as emergency services, kind of every gamut of the continuum. And then I went to work for the governor's office as well, and as Zoe referenced, traveling around the state, conducting an assessment tool called Vulnerability Index with 22 different counties around the state of Colorado, and really mostly with focus on rural communities to help them assess the need in their communities and then to determine what course of action was most appropriate, right? So was this somebody who really needed a very high level of services attached to permanent housing? Was this a family that needed maybe a smaller amount of supports, something like a rapid rehousing model? Or was this somebody who really was looking to get reunited with their family and just needed a little bit of, say, financial support, whether it was a bus ticket or somebody to work with them for a couple of months to help them get back on their feet. So working with communities in that regard, I think, was really amazing just to help the state assess their need. And then as Zoe mentioned, she and Jen Lopez really helped the state kind of start thinking about a housing pipeline. And so that's where we are now with this toolkit, helping communities to think through development. And again, bringing in folks like city council members, city managers. Mallory's not exactly a service provider, although the library has sort of become a service entity here in Trinidad. But we work with anybody who touches people who are either homeless, experiencing homelessness, or at risk of becoming homeless. And that includes individuals, families, people coming out of incarceration, recently homeless, long-term chronically homeless, and really try to, again, help communities understand that there is a spectrum of supports and resources that are available to them and figure out what is the best approach for your community. So with that said, we're just really excited to be here. We want to have a conversation. There we go. Thank you so much. And we'll just kind of flip forward to really just say this really was prompted by the participation of the Trinidad team in the Permanent Supportive Housing Toolkit. So this took place from October 2017 through January 2018. And now, a couple months later, we're really just here to talk about supportive housing, answer any questions and address any concerns that you have, and really talk about next steps in terms of addressing homelessness and the need for housing here in Trinidad. So we are super excited to be here, and that's, I think, a little bit of the introduction that we wanted to do.
And I just wanted to, and to Greg's point and what Katie just said, we really do want you to ask anything that comes into your head. Some of the stuff we're gonna talk about today is not easy and it feels counterintuitive, and I know from watching the expressions on the faces of Carlos and Greg and maybe not so much Mallory, but when they first came into the toolkit, I could see that, are you kidding me? And I hear it, you know, this is hard stuff. It took me a long time to get this concept, and I had to really see it to believe it, because I'm a big seer is believing. So please I don't want anybody to walk away not having at least been able to ask the question. We might not have all the answers, but we want to try. That I'll be, maybe before the need that I'll mention, because you are public official, is that this is truly a bipartisan, permanent supportive housing, we'll talk about that effort, it's truly a bipartisan effort. This is not just coming from one side or the other. Actually, the permanent supportive housing model really went to scale nationally through the George W. Bush administration. There's a guy named Phil Mangano, and you can Google him. He was kind of, again, I don't know his exact title, but he became the President Bush's guru to end homelessness. And what he said was, we have all this money, this federal money going into providing homeless housing services, and it is not reaching the people who need it the most. It's not reaching that 20% of the population who, because of either their physical, mental...
Excuse me, I'm sorry.
Okay.
I have to restart this computer.
That's okay. I can just...
Okay, please continue.
Because whatever it is, right, because of the trauma that they've had, that was a model I ran for years. It is a wonderful program. It works really well for people who don't have a lot of barriers, because you have to meet sobriety requirements, you have to meet your goal plans, you have to be able to have the wherewithal to be able to do all these things that a lot of people could do that didn't have the sort of level of disability that the people that we're talking about have. So what he said is, why aren't we using these precious federal resources on serving the people that are costing our communities the most money, essentially. And so it really was a bipartisan effort, so I wanted to put that out to you all. And really what they did was they really restructured most of the federal funding, so that instead of going to provide transitional housing or maybe housing for people, you know, domestic violence victims or people who are situationally homeless, they really wanted to focus those precious federal resources on the people that were, again, costing our communities the most money. Yes, Nick?
I have a question.
Yes.
So you said this program started during President Bush's tenure?
So the permanent...
But, no, that's not, well, my question is, over the terms of different presidents, has your revenue stream stayed the same, or has it fluctuated a lot? Or,
Yeah.
and the second part of that is, for the present administration, what are we looking at?
Sure, that's a great question. So it has fluctuated a little bit, but nothing dramatic. So it's pretty much safe, except for this year, when actually for the first time ever, we have more money going into HUD, in the HUD funding bill, which is Housing and Urban Development, that's the federal. So there's a whole bunch of different pots of money that come in under it. And for this year, I don't know what happened, but for the first year ever, we have double the money in home funds, which is a major source of funding that can pay for some of these types of projects. Doubled in CDBG, which is you guys are familiar with CDBG, I'm sure. And double, not necessarily double, but increase pretty much on every line item. So this is the first time ever, and this is not to you all, but that I can actually go into a funding agency that administers this money and say, you don't get to whine to me that you got cut this year. You got twice as much money as you usually get, and you're gonna start putting some of that money into these projects. So it's like Christmas for me. I'm really excited.
I will add to that as well with the tax reform bill. So we were very worried about what was going to happen with some of the cuts that were proposed to private activity bonds as well as the low-income housing tax credits. We didn't come out unscathed, certainly by any stretch of the imagination. Obviously, I think the biggest hit is going to be from the corporate tax rate dropping from 35% to 21%. However, private activity bonds were retained, as were the low-income housing tax credits. And so while we are struggling with some of our investors at this point, when a lot of the projects that we do are funded by low-income housing tax credits, investors will buy those tax credits, and obviously those are not as competitive now as they once were, and those prices where they were, $1 for $1 or even, $1.20 to $1 on the tax credit side are now looking at around 88 cents to 92 cents on the dollar. So there has been some, a little bit of a rumbling, I would say, because of tax reform, but it isn't as though this has never happened before. I would say 30 years ago, you were getting 50 to 60 cents on each dollar for tax credits. So it's something that we've been through before, but it does make it a little bit harder to find investors who are willing to fund these projects. But I will say, aside from what Zoe just said on the HUD front, we got off extremely lucky.
Now, has that, has that funding been finalized, or is that something that Congress is still working on? Because I just recently have seen where they've been taking stuff out.
Yeah, it was signed by the president, so it's all good to go. And again, it's just this year, so we don't know what's gonna happen
That
next
was the
year.
entire funding bill, but I understand that they're still working through some of the processes of individual line items to be able to cut stuff out.
Okay, I wasn't aware of that, so hopefully that won't happen, because we're pretty excited about it. Yes.
I was just gonna ask, can we get this monitor turned on for us?
Oh, sure, of course you can.
Okay.
Is this it?
Oh, okay, sorry. Yeah. I'm too short to speak.
Yeah, I turned one off and the other one.
Here, I just
so you can just kind of line yourself.
Sorry, okay. So Katie, do you want to talk about, I'm sure we're not telling you all anything that you don't know, but we did want to just touch on.
He worked on gathering for us, but I think the point to this slide is just to make it known that there is obviously a need here in Trinidad. When you have a recreation center, a community center that is providing 2,500 showers to people in need in 1 year alone, and about 720 meals being provided through the soup kitchen on a monthly basis, there's obviously people who are in need. And
Here's something that I just heard over the weekend, is that a lot of these are just transients coming through. They're jumping off the train because the train comes through here and they stay here for a week or two. They jump back on and they're gone. Because this lady that I was talking to said that in her building alone, she has seen the number of, she said, is there a new group coming
we
through?
get into next steps, we want to talk about really digging deeper into the data because there's not a lot of solid data right now. And so, and we can talk about this later in the presentation, but I know that the Trinidad, Greg and Mallory and Carlos have been in conversations with a group from, they're out of the Burns Center, and they have proposed coming and doing a more in-depth assessment using an assessment tool called it's called the Vulnerability Index Service Prioritization Determination Tool. It's a very, very long name. VISPDAT is the short name.
I was looking at this information that you gave us here, and it says the conclusions. So the water level of evidence indicates that permanent supportive housing is promising, but research is needed to clarify the model and determine the most effective elements for various subpopulations.
Yeah. So
So
that's
it's still, this thing is still up in the air.
well, and we're going to show you some results that are definitely proven as an evidence-based cost savings model. But that article, I think we kind of pulled that article as well as a recovery or sober living article to show that in all these models, most of the research is shown as moderate, right? So if you look at the recovery living model or article as well, you'll also see that the conclusion is that more research is needed to see actually how well these services and these programs do perform over time. But what we can show, what we can prove from recent programs, both in Colorado as well as nationally, is that the cost savings and the benefits back to community have been proven for 20 years plus running. And so those are the types of things that we can look at more in depth.
That's what I like, that's what I think we really need to see is how they're determining these cost savings.
Absolutely.
I mean, that's a
Absolutely.
really critical thing because,
Yeah.
cost savings could be A, could be Z.
Absolutely, yep. So really, just to kind of point out again, the bottom bullet here, the lack of data regarding those experiencing homelessness and what the needs truly are is something that we know it still hasn't really been done here in Trinidad. So we are not proposing to do that, but there is another group that is it's a research institute that's based out of Denver. It's a National Institute on Poverty and Homelessness, and they do this kind of work all over the country where they will actually come in, they'll work with your service providers and anybody, community members who are interested in getting more involved with the issue, and we'll actually train them on using an assessment tool that gathers a lot of detailed personal information about the individuals in your community so that you can start basically making a by name bi-faced registry of individuals experiencing homelessness in Trinidad, and then start to just determine, are these people who are from here, or are these people who are just passing through in here very temporarily? At that point as well, there's a scoring mechanism that allows for you to see what types of interventions and services would be most beneficial for these individuals, right?
How forthcoming are these individuals that you're talking to when you, when you go out and you
Totally.
talk to someone out on the street? How forthcoming are they, or are they telling you the truth?
Well, so this is where a
How
lot
do you
of,
assess that? Is there an average that you're taking, or what do you do?
this is where a lot of the training comes in as being really important, because it is, you know, if I were to walk out on the streets of Trinidad today, I probably would not get the most forthright answers given to me. But somebody and people who are, somebody who's been trained and people who are known in your community and actually probably already have relationships with a lot of these folks are the ones that this group would probably want to train further. So it's your people at the soup kitchen, it's the people at your churches, it's the people who interact with folks all the time, but that are willing to actually go through a pretty intensive training to learn how to conduct the questions and ask the questions so that you get a real honest answer. And the thing about these surveys, to be honest, is the more honest the person can be, the better they can be scored and the better they can be served. When we don't know the truth about somebody's substance abuse history or their mental health history or their domestic violence or sexual abuse history, it's very hard, right, to determine actually what types of services and needs they need the most. So you have to, I think, have a relationship with that person when you're conducting.
Is that
I think it's
one,
great.
one thing that you'll find out, and I know this for a fact, is that people that are on substance abuse, to be honest with you, they know a lot of good to you, even if they do know you.
Sure.
I know, I had a brother who was an alcoholic, and he said, Phil, he said, I will lie, you know, to anybody while I'm on alcohol. I will lie to anybody. I'll lie to my brothers, I'll lie to my sisters, I'll lie to my family. So that's where the truth is there is that truth.
Right, sure, great question.
So are they telling the truth?
Sure. Thank you for that. Okay,
Okay, so let's talk about what we're talking about. So we keep throwing out this supportive housing permit, supportive housing, what are we actually talking about? So basically what we're talking about, the basic model, and again, every community tweaks it a little bit differently to meet the needs of their community, but basically what we're talking about is combining affordable housing. So when I say affordable, what I mean is nobody pays more than 30% of their income for rent. So if you have a homeless veteran, Vietnam era veteran, and we see this all the time, who has never been able to get their VA benefits because they've been homeless and they've got addiction and they've got PTSD and they haven't been able to follow through and they've got zero income when they come in, they pay zero rent. However, the goal is to get them their VA benefits, and then as they get their benefit, their income increases to 30% of their income. So it's a way to try and acknowledge that some people are gonna come in with zero or very little income, and we would still wanna serve them, but that we want them to live in somewhat of a real world, which is that you do pay towards your rent. So as you get income, we're gonna charge you rent. Which means you have to have a pretty intense operating subsidy attached, right? These buildings don't just magically cost less because you have low-income people living there. And luckily you live in a state where there's resources available for that right now. The key, obviously, so let me actually address the permanent, because that gives people sometimes a little bit of anxiety, like what are we talking about here? Really, it should be called open-ended supportive housing. It just didn't sound good enough, I guess. The idea is that everybody is on their own path at their own time to some extent, depending on the depth of their disability. So again, it depends on your target population, right? So let's say you guys get this survey, this VI SPDAT done, and it comes back and it says 50% of our non-transient homeless population that we all see every day and we've seen for years living in our community are Vietnam era veterans. And they are extremely medically fragile. And they do have extreme untreated PTSD, and they may have addiction issues. So that if that's the target for your project, then you know that for probably a lot of those folks, that might be their permanent housing solution. They might always need some level of support. If you do the surveys and you find out that it's young families or, people in general who maybe are more economically disadvantaged and have some other stuff going on that has stopped them from being successful in housing in the past, then you might anticipate that they're probably going to move into another housing environment. One of the things about these housing projects is that if people can move at a certain point, they do. These aren't luxury apartments. I mean, they're nice and they're beautiful and they're an asset to your community, but they're not huge and they don't have swimming pools. And so if somebody gets to a point where they can fiscally move on and they are stable stable physically and or mentally and or with their addiction, they typically move on. So they call it permanent supportive housing. For most of the population, it is not permanent. For some folks, it might be their permanent housing solution. It is independent living, so we're not talking about a group home. It's not licensed. It's people have leases just like you or I have leases. They are accountable to those leases. Just like you or I, they can't not pay rent. They can't have wild parties. They can't do illegal drugs. Just like you or I can't do that in our units. But it is independent living. And the services really are the key, and we can't stress that enough, that obviously if you have a building that is, that you have people who are living there who are really struggling with their disabilities and you don't have some pretty intensive services on site, you're gonna have a lot of potential issues happening in that building. And that's really what makes these perform so well. So
Explain to me the
yeah.
difference, how you determine disability and addiction. How does that, I mean, to me, a disability is someone who, you know, is in wheelchair, you know, or an addiction is addiction.
Sure.
So that's the big question I have, and
Yeah.
people with disabilities, I don't have an issue helping them. People with addictions, it's a totally different story.
There's a recognized category for addiction, alcoholism, all kinds of addiction.
And I'll be honest with you, and I know that some of us have been hearing from some of our constituents around town.
Sure.
And that's the big problem that we're hearing, and now we're being confronted, and I think Commissioner States already has heard some.
I've been asked, what's the ultimate goal? And you mentioned the provision of services, mental health, addiction treatment. Who's going to provide that? Who's going to pay for that?
Sure.
And the taxpayers locally, you mentioned there's a fair amount of federal money to do this.
Right.
Taxpayers who have worked for generations to accomplish what they have done and now are in their 80s and 90s living, continuing to live at home,
Sure.
are wondering, what's going to happen to me? Am I going to be asked to pay for these people?
Sure.
And then I've been a police officer for 40 years.
Sure.
Okay, so I come with kind of a jaundiced, suspicious eye.
Sure.
And I had occasion to contact many people in the course of my life in county patrol, many of whom were in the brief encounter I had. I made this assessment of my own,
Sure.
legitimate, and homeless folks in need of help, whatever that was, and the Lord knows I bought a lot of meals and groceries and the like, okay? However, there are also a number of scammers out there
Sure.
who will tell you whatever
Absolutely.
they think you want to hear to get whatever they can at the present moment,
Yeah.
and then be on their way. Now, you mentioned that there's going to be housing facilities, okay, and they're going to sign a lease, they're going to have a contract and all that sort of stuff. The logistics of this, who's going to maintain that? Who's going to supervise that? Who's going to oversee it?
Sure.
Who's going to collect their rent? What expense is that to the city to be able
Sure.
to do that service?
Right.
Trinidad does not have a wealth of mental health professionals. I don't know that we have a wealth of dependency, alcohol or drug agencies, of which I'm aware,
Right.
to provide treatment. So
Yeah.
who's going to pay for that treatment? That's
Sure.
not free. And this is not a free ride. And to Michelle's point, when she visited a shelter in Pueblo or Denver, we want to avoid the idea of warehousing.
Sure.
Lent just ended. We understand the whole Christian thing about being your brother's keeper and a hand up. Okay, but for generations, having lived here my entire life, I know people that have made a career or a lifestyle out of living on public assistance.
Sure.
And that frustrates and annoys a number of legitimate bona fide taxpayers.
Yeah.
To say, here we go again. And I'm asked to pick up the weight for somebody who chooses not to. I've even been told Thessalonians 4, you don't work, you don't eat.
So that's a lot.
I talk really fast, you have to listen faster.
I am.
You like the most and start
Well,
there.
so I think to your point, so, and I should have said.
May I interrupt?
Yeah.
It's just a general suspicious
Sure.
attitude.
Absolutely.
Of which all of those comments and questions are reflected.
Exactly, absolutely. And this is, you are not the first person or the 100th person I've heard this from, so. So in general, and I should have done a disclaimer, this is not gonna solve all your problems with homelessness in Pueblo. This permanent supportive housing model is a very specific model that we are talking about. And part of the reason we're talking about it is because there is money to pay for it that does not come out of the local taxpayer dollars.
Good to hear.
Most of the projects that we have worked on, I mean, if there's a city that has entitlement money and they choose to put it into the project, if they have CDBG or whatever they do, otherwise, the projects we do in small and rural communities, cities don't have money to put into the project.
It's not city money.
So part of the reason we're here talking about this at all is because There's investors who are interested in this and putting money into these projects through the low-income housing tax credit program. There is federal money that is prioritized, that you couldn't get anywhere to do anything else in your community. Most of the federal homeless resources right now, almost without exception, are prioritized for permanent supportive housing because it is an evidence-based practice and it's been going on for 20 years and there's data. So there's money to pay for it from the federal, there is money to pay for it from the state level, there's money to pay for it now with the additional, I don't know if you guys are in a entitlement committee or not, but, and I don't even know if that makes any sense. But basically there's other money to pay for this. So, and the service dollars, because you're absolutely right, that is critical. And I come from Minnesota, we call ourselves the land of 10,000 treatments. So for me coming here, you have very statewide overall the state, and I love Colorado, and I'd probably being recorded right now. I love Colorado, but this, I think everybody who works in the industry around addiction and mental health would say this is a very poor resource state when it comes to addiction and mental health services. I think we could all agree with that. So the nice thing, again, because we have this model that's evidence-based practice and that has been proven, the state is working very, very, very hard and making significant progress on figuring out a stable, ongoing source of service dollars to provide services. Now, there's Medicaid, which is a federal entitlement benefit, and we have made a lot of progress. I'll tell you, Pueblo is kicking butt. I watch my language. I'm being recorded. They have, and you have the same mental health center that they do. It's different staff, and we need to figure that out. But they have figured out how to bill for Medicaid for a lot of these services, and they are going in for a project that is going to get funded, I'm pretty sure, because they have been able to say to mental health center, here, we're going to show you on paper how we can do this forever, as long as that benefit, you know.
Here's the thing about that part, here's where I'm gonna hear it, and I've heard it already, is that, sure, there's Medicaid services gonna be provided. Now, the people that truly need those Medicaid services, they're being shafted because now they're taking resources to this other resource, or these other people that
It's
request
totally
it.
different pot of money. So they wouldn't even be able to act like this, if you're seniors maybe, for example, totally separate, they wouldn't even be able to, totally separate pot of money. Medicaid, the mental health and the behavioral health, I should say, which covers the addiction service also, is under a completely, it's actually a much less robust source than everything else. Basically, that is carved out on its own, the behavioral health. And it's, Medicaid makes my head hurt really bad, but it is a totally different pool than that money.
Now, I do know, and I'm not sure where it's gone at this point, but the Trump administration recently was targeting the tax credits and wanted to eliminate them or cut it back.
It
I'm not sure.
has not been eliminated.
I'm not sure.
So-
I know that was a target area. that-
It was a target area, but new market tax credits has not been eliminated, nor have historic tax credits, nor have low-income housing tax credits. So, I mean, it was one of the things that we were most worried about being on the chopping block. What I said earlier was that with that corporate tax rate being reduced from 35% to 21%, that does have an impact in terms of investors, right, looking to buy tax credits, because at this point, right, their incentive is a lot less than it was, but in terms of the tax credits being available, so CHAFA, and Belinda's with CHAFA, the Colorado Housing Finance Agency, is the authority or the state agency that oversees those tax credits. Colorado gets about $13 million a year, and that's based on a population count, so it's about $2.35 per person in the state. That makes up that $13 million a year that comes into the state. CHAFA then allocates those tax credits awards, both during a 9% round in June as well as a 4% round that is really funded by private activity bonds. So none of that is going to go away, and CHAFA has really, and if you look at CHAFA's qualified allocation plan, which is the QAP, which outlines their priorities, permanent supportive housing is actually a priority in CHAFA's qualified allocation plan. So it's not a guarantee that these permanent supportive housing projects will get awarded tax credits, but they definitely get additional sort of leverage points because of the fact that it is a priority
Now,
in the tax credit program.
Where Traffic has gone through that process, where it's basically a project, now
Yeah.
where permanent supportive housing can be people on Medicaid services now, are they defining people with issues, with mental issues, with drug issues? Are they separating different pools of money for different areas, or is it just basically all one?
No, so so there isn't a kind of a separation. It's really that's just a priority model of housing, but we've got permanent supportive housing projects across the state that are targeting homeless young adults. We've got that are targeting, several that are targeting homeless veterans, several that are targeting homeless families, and then several that are targeting homeless individuals. It's really up to the local community to say who the priority is, and then that's where we would work to put a project together. So if you said, if you did this survey, had somebody come in and do this survey again, and the survey said 50% of the people that you all know that have been really struggling for a long time are veterans, then we would look at putting together, I mean, you tell us, it's driven by the local community who your priority is. I think that the one thing, I lost it. It'll come back, hang on.
But there are, to her point, there are some different pots of resources. So if it were youth, there are different types of vouchers and different pots of resources for youth than there are for veterans or seniors, or for people who are highly medically challenged. So whether that's physical morbidity, that their rate of dying is much higher than somebody who is housed but has the same types of physical ailments, or a mental disability or substance abuse
Well, I
disorder.
do know that, and I think one of the target areas that I am more prone to support in this case is toward the veterans. Because I know in Los Angeles County,
Right.
we have approximately 1,500 veterans, and how many of those are probably homeless, I don't know.
And that's what we want, that's what we
Lord,
want to
that
find out.
that is an area that I feel like I would be more supportive than anything.
I have a question slash concern, because you've kind of confirmed that there's federal money out there. And I assume such, or you wouldn't be doing what you're doing. But my concern is when you talk to people like with the Department of Social Services, they are at their max. I mean, so say you get a client that would qualify for something through our Department of Social Services, then that puts an additional strain on our systems already, and that's what's concerning to me. I understand the money's there probably for the physical location. I'm concerned about whether the community can handle the project after the physical part is completed. I'm sure you're aware that Trinidad isn't really a very affluent community. We've had issues and we've had lower income. The majority of people in Trinidad that live here now, are at lower income and get some kind of either subsidized house or whatever. And I'm just afraid that our systems will not be able to handle the influx of whatever your program brings into the community.
Sure, so a couple of points, that's a great point. So I wish we had social services more involved in these projects, but we don't. We don't typically, if they get involved at all, it's because they've actually been the one to say we want to do these because we're not serving people very well when we can't find them, right? We might have a client who needs to be going to therapy and then they don't show up or we can't find them because they're homeless. So the only time we really have human service, or that's what we called it, human services, but social service, involves if they come to us and say, we want to be in that building because we wanted to house our clients. But most of the time, it's really, the funding really comes partially through the project itself. If it can kick off enough revenue because it has enough operating subsidy, it will pay for, that revenue gets prioritized to pay for our services and through the Medicaid programs. So I wish we could do a better job because I do think when we have social services involved, they really go, oh, this makes our job so much easier. We've got 20 families that we used to have to try and chase around Trinidad. Now they're in one building and we can get the kids in Head Start and we can, get mom into a work program and we can do this. But it wouldn't be an additional burden on them. It would be just if they wanted to partner, because it benefited them and made their jobs easier.
They've got to be involved somewhere along the line.
I want them to.
But I mean, in your process,
Yeah.
like you're saying, okay, they're gonna pay no more than 30% of their rent. So if somebody qualifies for help with social services, they're not gonna come to you, they're gonna come to Los Animas County's Department of Human Services. I apologize, it was the wrong term. But that's the point where I get concerned.
Yeah.
And there are so there are staff, right, that are built into these projects. And those staff, there's property management staff, right, and then there's service staff. So when you were bringing up questions earlier, I think it was you about how's this gonna be paid for. There is, in these projects, there are three different budgets, right? There's an operational budget, property management budget,
Okay.
there's a services budget, and then there's a development budget. And we can get into all of the details, if you so wish, about what those budgets look like. But I think to your point, we haven't even talked about the operational subsidy, but that really does come from the State Division of Housing. So while some of these are pass-through funds from HUD, these are federal vouchers, Section 8, housing choice vouchers, whatever you want to call them. We intend to project-base these vouchers, which means this is not a tenant-based voucher, that if you qualify because you are at 30% of AMI and you are income qualified for this building, I give you a voucher because you've won the Section 8 lottery. And then after about a year, you decide, actually, I want to go and take this to Florida. And some housing authorities will port those vouchers, which means you get to leave and go to Florida and take that voucher with you. We do not do that with these projects. These projects become project-based vouchers, which means they are not attached to the tenant, they're attached to the unit. So that somebody cannot just up and leave with that subsidy attached to them. That subsidy stays within the building. That subsidy is supplementing for the person's rent, right? So they're paying up to 30% of their income. The voucher pays them for the other 70%. And there actually is some cash flow that comes from that payment for this specific population in a way that 2 years prior, we did not have. It is a priority of the state, and the State Division of Housing is saying, we want people in houses, whether it's an apartment, unit, whatever that looks like, as of yesterday. And we have the vouchers that are here to help
So
supplement that.
you're saying that, so Trinidad has a housing, one of your housing programs.
Mhm.
On site, there is somebody that will help them through the assistance, financial assistance.
Yes.
They will not have to go to social services for help.
Well, that's up to each individual. I mean, if you have people that are eligible for certain services in your community, we couldn't stop them from applying for those services, because that would make.
Before you go on, we got a couple of people in the audience that I think I'd like to hear from. Walt, can you come forward and kind of give us your perspective on this? And then after that, I'd like to hear from our chief of police, because he has a different perspective.
Sure.
on this.
Yeah, and we'd love to get back to that if we
Yeah.
can follow up with your questions
Because
about how those
I'm
services are gonna be paid
confused.
for. Yeah, well, I think we'd love to dive into that as well a little bit.
Okay.
Because they're, through
Thank you.
the council governments, they do provide some services similar to
Sure.
the Department of Human Services in some regard.
Okay, great.
My name is Walt Holden, I'm the Executive Director of South Central Council of Governments, so we provide a lot of services for these individuals just because they're part of the population that should be helped in general. And I'll also say I've got probably some questions and some opinions of this based on the fact that I've been a social worker for 40 years now, and have taught across the country, and was in Kansas City when they implemented or started to try to implement a similar program. One of what I heard you just say is that the subsidies are attached to the unit.
Correct.
The first thing that popped in my mind, isn't that a disincentive for people to move on? If the voucher was attached to the individual and you say people come and go out of these projects because they start getting more income, their mental illness is being controlled or their addictions are being controlled, isn't it a disincentive for them to move if they can't take a voucher with them? So that's one of my questions. The other question I would have is, what's the critical mass for services? Because in Trinidad, we don't have those services available. So if you're living in Pueblo or Colorado Springs, and there's somebody who's already working somewhere or has a case of their own, and this becomes a secondary piece that they work on. In Trinidad, to get somebody here, it wouldn't be a secondary piece. It would have to be their entire caseload and support them completely, or they're not going to be able to, you're not going to be able to recruit people. And that's my biggest issue all the way through this, is how do you recruit people in for this project when we can't recruit them into the area in general? The issue with DHS is a recruiting issue.
Staffing.
They've always got staffing issues. They've always got positions open, they can't get them filled, they can't pay for them across the community. So those are issues that I think as a community we should have to address. And to me, if we're not partnering with DHS, if we're not partnering with all the people in the community, this program won't work as a standalone program. So I think it's going to have to involve all of them, and they're all going to be engaged very, very much together, or it's not going to work. I do believe that models of this have worked very well, but most of them I've seen in the larger cities. If the critical mass is beyond Trinidad, then probably a less popular but just as viable would be, should we be partnering with Pueblo? Should we be helping them get the housing up in Pueblo where the services might be more available, and somehow do a partnership where we're helping support them in their effort, rather than set up two separate efforts that are going to compete for the same service providers?
You know, the one thing that came up, Walt, and I agree with you, that I talked to, the reason why I bring it up, especially the veterans, is because Mon Carmel has the Mon Carmel here, but they also have the veteran services in Colorado Springs, and they do want to expand the services down here for the veterans. So that's why I say that would be a target area that could work in the near future. Or I'm not sure how far down the road, because I talked to the owners just last week, and they mentioned that.
Great, thank you so much, very thoughtful questions. So do
Chief, you want to
address
come
the
forward and give us
piece
your
about-
Do you wanna let them answer the question?
Yeah.
That's not the only kind of voucher that's available. I don't know what the state's gonna have available. But the other thing I say, and I don't mean to be facetious, but how many people still in this room still live with their parents? And you had free rent when you were living with your parents, and you got fed, and you got, right? So this is very, this is still a program, right? So people, I'm gonna be knocking on, if I don't see Katie every day, who I know has got some pretty severe disabilities and morbidity, I'm gonna be knocking on her door every day. That's gonna get really old. If she gets to a point where she's stable, with her meds are stable, and she has done some employment training, and she's got enough funding, money that she can actually find another place to live, she's gonna wanna do that rather than having me knock on her door every day. So some of it has to just do with, we call it independent living housing, and it is independent to some extent, but there's staff there sometimes 24 hours a day, and I'm bugging her because I know that not bugging her. I am engaging her in services because I know that she's highly vulnerable and I want to keep her safe. So that's the other incentive for people. Really, people, if they can, they do move on, and we can get you some follow-up data with that. It's a great, great point.
And this slide I just threw up here is just to kind of, again, show you that this is part of a continuum, right? So I think that we would all agree, right, that affordable rental housing and even home ownership for everybody in this room, and for anybody who aspires to have their own home, that's probably the ultimate goal, right? It's not gonna work for everyone, just like supportive housing isn't going to work for everyone. But we just sort of threw this up here to show that there is a whole continuum out there, right? When somebody is experiencing homelessness, it generally starts either on the streets, or the shelters, or the jails, the prisons, the emergency rooms, and the hospitals, right? And instead of cycling people in and out of those emergency services, we want to then move them into some sort of housing intervention on the continuum. So this is really to show that permanent support housing is one, as is Route 3 housing, transitional recovery housing, and affordable rental housing or more independent housing would be something that ultimately, if people can live on their own, would be the ultimate goal. But we do note, as Zoe's point earlier, that some people are not going to be able to live independently on their own.
And to your point about this being a community effort, you're absolutely right. And I think we're always trying to be sensitive to not overburdening, to your point, already overburdened systems. But part of the process with these projects is that we do a really substantial service planning. I mean, we're not just throwing in some cookie cutter service plan that we've used for every other project. We are actually identifying who in the community would possibly touch this project or work. Is it the VA, if it's veterans? I mean, and we get everybody in a room together, and we have a 10-page service planning matrix that we go through. And you tell, you identify, is it COG who should come and have somebody there 10 hours a week and do whatever services you provide? Is it the rescue mission that should come in from Pueblo? Is it the mental health? And so we go through and we facilitate, but it's your service plan. It's this community who says to this project, this is what we think the service is. So that's a really important point. Again, we're always trying to balance not wanting people to feel like they're going to be overburdened. And I think to your questions too, we're not talking about people who are coming to this community for this housing. Part of the reason I had this slide up is because I wanted to show part of our strategy is to do this everywhere so that people aren't having to leave their community. So that you're not going to end up with a bunch of people that is not what we're seeing happen. We're seeing when the Grand Junction project which was the first one in the state to come out of this process, open 40 units of permanent supportive housing for families and individuals who are severely disabled, addicted, you name it. And everybody in that building is from Grand Junction, at least last time I checked. So we really aren't seeing this migration happen, and part of that is because the community is the one who fills this building, right? You're the one who knows that it's opening. You're the one, Mallory's the one who, she's gonna know 6 months before this project opens and it's opening, and she's gonna get all her folks that have been living here, who she's been dealing with in the library, qualified and on the waiting list for that building, so that, well, it's a little more complicated than that, but essentially, so that when that building opens, it's the folks who are from here who are getting into that building. So I did want to just mention that too, because people have a lot of anxiety in individualized community projects.
Have you ever contacted the housing authority for the city to see what's going on? I saw a statistic that there's a 22-month. Have they given you any input as far as what's available?
So the Housing Authority would be one of the first partners that we would bring into the conversation if this community decided that they want to move forward with
Okay,
this.
so we're not at that point.
We're not at that point yet, but one of the things that the State Division of Housing really looks for in their services plan when you're applying for vouchers is there a local match and is there a local community contribution? That can come from the city, whether that's with waived permit fees or other types of fees that are waived by the city. It can also come from a local housing authority that says, you know what, if this project is requesting 20, let's say 30 vouchers total, right, for 30 units for this project, if we can see that this would actually bring 30 units to our community, we are going to match 15 vouchers. The housing authority then is only giving out 15 vouchers, but they're getting 30 new units. And the State Division of Housing has actually seen that there's local buy-in as well. So it's definitely a strategy that we've always put into place when we're working with local communities. But we probably wouldn't have that conversation yet with the Housing Authority until we were absolutely ready. And we would ask anybody on this council or anybody else in this room who probably already has a relationship with the Housing Authority to say, hey, can you get a meeting set up and let's just go and talk to them about what we're thinking. And again, for housing authorities, we start these conversations 3 years out, knowing that if this did go through the tax credit project, it would probably be a 3-year project. So that housing authority they would make an initial commitment contingent upon the funding being received, but they would know that they would be committing these vouchers to say 2021, 2022. So we definitely would give them ample time to prepare for that.
And again, if you can't, if the city comes back and the housing authority comes back and says, we don't have any, or we're too oversubscribed, it's not a make or break. Alamosa project we did, there was no contribution from the city or the housing authority. Same thing with Durango, same thing, I think Grand Junction put some vouchers in, and what was the other one I was looking at? Canyon City did some fee waivers, but no vouchers or anything else. And the COG was very involved in that project as well. Okay, the chief, I think?
Chief?
How are you?
Great, thanks.
Yeah, my thoughts echo a lot of what you've already addressed, and I need to see the survey. I need to see what population we're actually speaking about. Because I think what we get confused about is the transients. I think people, the transit problem is the biggest problem we have here currently. I'm not sure what the homeless numbers are. And in fairness, I did have lunch at my mom's today, so I don't know if that counts. So, yeah, I guess I really want to see these numbers, and I'm a lot like Anthony. I'm suspicious about the actual data we're going to get. We're going to get fair, accurate numbers. So, I mean, that just kind of comes with the nature of the job, so to speak. So, you know, it seems like the more of these I attend, the less suspicious I am. I mean, here's a perfect example. I was under the impression, and I think I even addressed it the last retreat we had, you know, I was kind of under the impression, Bill, that they will come. And that's going to kind of already tax, where we don't have the services to provide for the locals that we have. So, but then they show me this slide here that maybe that's not essentially true. So I think a lot of it is we've got to educate ourselves to make a wise decision moving forward and continue to have these discussions and see what maybe the downfalls are and maybe the upsides, and just weigh it as a community to see if this is the approach we want to move in.
And to your, thank you for being here, first of all, and you're gonna be part of the team, by the way, because I'm telling you, at the end of the day, so my ex-husband was a police officer, so thank you for your service, and he was a police officer that worked with the homeless population. And when we did this project in my hometown, so we did a 70-unit permanent supportive housing, targeting, Mr. Mayor, targeting on purpose, people that had been through the most treatments and the most detoxes and had failed every time. Because the cops were like, we have become social workers, and we do not want to become social workers. We want to be doing our policing. And so they were very suspicious, but they said, okay, give this a shot. And we have housed those 70 people, and that building has been open for 10 years. I'll tell you, if you call our police chief, well, it would have to be our former one, because he was the one there at the streets, and so cops were able to actually do their actual jobs.
Well, in speaking to that, and I don't know how you would even address this as part of your survey, I think what we have here, what we call is, they're couch surfers.
Sure.
So they really don't have a home, and what they do is they just find the next friend they could, sit at their couch for the next couple of days or whatever, and then kind of move on, or the next abandoned building, or whatever they can to just, for that night.
Sure.
So I don't even know how we address that as part of the survey, or where you find those people to even get at those accurate numbers.
Yeah.
But, I mean, we don't have the proper treatment here for the people in our community now. We addressed that at the mayor's roundtable. One of the problems we have is we don't have the treatment for the people, and we're going to be adding more people, so the treatment is one of the things. I see a revolving door. We pick up the individual where they're on the street and they're a mess. We put them in detox, house them for a little bit. They get sobered up. A couple days, they're right back to the same thing. I mean, it's even to the point where they'll call us and say, hey, I need a ride to detox.
Yeah.
So, I mean, that's what ends up happening with a lot of them. So, I just think it's to the point where, let's get the treatment for those that we have here, find out what exactly the numbers are we're looking at, and then make the right decision.
You mentioned that they had built a 70-unit apartment. How big was the population of the community?
That was in my hometown of 90,000, so that's a lot bigger than here, but just as an example, and you could walk into this place tomorrow, and I know because I bring groups from all over the country. I've done projects. That project has inspired people to do projects from all the way from Alaska to Florida. I mean, I've brought in hundreds of people through there. And when I tell them that I'm going to bring them into a building that's full of chronically addicted, actively using, mentally ill, medically fragile people, this look of complete fear comes across their face. And they go in and you don't even know where you are. And people are welcoming, and because people have been given a home and dignity, and yeah, they might not be 100% sober, but they've used a lot less. And the police have become our biggest ally. And actually, I would love for you, the Durango Sheriff's Department, I should say, is behind the ones that are the catalyst for their project. They're also doing a 30-unit PSH right now to serve the guys living in the camps, right? I shouldn't say guys, the people living in the camps.
And Pueblo.
And Pueblo. The Pueblo Sheriff's Department is the one pushing, like one of the major forces on their team pushing their project, because the police want to police.
Well, those camp people aren't going to be the ones that are going to want the permanent housing. They just want a week or two to move on to the next community. And I'm a lot more leery of that kind of housing situation, because then you're inviting all kinds of different problems into your community from those. So I'd be less supportive of that.
Yeah, this is not, I just want to be really clear, this is not for a transient population. This isn't for people who are maybe just situationally or have chosen that they want to live out. This is really for people in the community that have, that you see, that have a lot of disabilities and really need that stability and that services to stay housed.
Hey, Chief.
So-
I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
Beauty before age.
Every time.
I'm sorry, but you kind of have an idea of what we call them transient / homeless. How big of a homeless problem do you think Trinidad has? Or can you pinpoint?
I really can't pinpoint that. I can tell you that our transient problem is increasing. I mean, day by day, and now it's going to get warmer, and we're going to see it even more. Last summer was probably the most since I've been here, where I saw that population increase even more steadily. This summer, I guess we're going to even see more.
I think
so. That's why I say I think the transit problem is huge, and it's going to be even a huge problem because it's across the state. You can watch any of the local newses, and I mean it's everywhere. I mean, whether it's private property or public property, I mean they're just kind of squatting and taking that population over, so to speak. So, yeah, I don't know what this summer is going to bring and what we do to control that. But homeless, I need to see the numbers. I need to wait and see actually what there are, just, I mean, I could think of a handful that possibly, and their next easiest thing is still so they can get their next high, and that's why we're interacting with them constantly. So again, treatment.
Well, that's one of the things that enticed me so much is that there is treatment facilities in this particular program, which would only enhance what we lack already here in Trinidad. I mean, at Health Solutions, we don't have a psychiatrist. People have to Skype out of state sometimes to speak with a psychiatrist. So the way I feel about this, it's going to enhance what little we already have, and I don't see that being a bad thing.
Yeah, and any addiction, I mean, whether it's alcohol or drug or whatever, it's gotta be that individual wanting the treatment. And until they actually want that treatment, you're spinning your wheels, because like the mayor addressed earlier, they're gonna do and say what they need to do to get to their next high. So
I agree with that completely, but as far as I'm aware, we don't currently have any type of treatment
we don't,
facility in
we
Trinidad
don't,
anyway.
we don't, and that's what I said about when we address the roundtable that time, we need to address that issue. We need to try to find mental health here as well as the drug addiction. All we have is a place where we can sober them up and then offer them care, but it's not care where they're permanently there until they get their sobriety.
Yeah, I think we could all agree, right, that it is a lot harder to get your life in order, right, when you're living under a bridge, when you're constantly confronted by your worst nightmares, and when you are being influenced by negative factors, right? So we are trying to take folks away from that situation, right? And with the housing first model, the premise is you get people housed first, and then you really try to stabilize them so that you can start addressing the mental health issues, the substance abuse issues. Trauma is a huge, huge, huge issue with people who have experienced homelessness, but you can't do that when you're out on the streets and you're constantly being inundated with negative factors.
The big question, three big questions I got is, one is the demographics of Trinidad. We have a very aged population. And as we know, what aged population will think of something like this. The first thing they want to do is lock their doors and bar their windows and all this stuff. So getting through to them is going to be a really difficult proposition. The other thing I have is, and like I said, is just the neighborhood itself, that wherever this goes into, whether it's 2 years down the road or 3 years down the road, how do you convince the neighborhood? And I think your neighborhood should control whether this goes in there or not. That's my feeling, besides the rest of the population. Third thing I have is long-term sustainability. Because, sure, this may be good for today, we might get money tomorrow. I'm not sure, I don't want to get political here, but just in what's been happening this past year with the budget at the federal level, they're talking about that, sure, the tax credits and all this stuff that we're going to be getting is up until like year 2025, after that, there's going to be less money because people are going to be taxed at a higher rate. So we're looking at a long-term sustainability issue. And if we look at when is the next downturn of the economy going to be, and that's usually the first place that it hits. And then what are we left with? So these are realistic things that I think we need to consider.
Anthony, I won't interrupt in front of you.
Because I have short-term memory issues, okay?
Right, that's right. Before I jump in, I offer you, sir, to finish your comment.
Let me think.
All right.
Who administers this program? Who's responsible for it?
Which one?
Anyway,
The permanent supportive housing project? It's whoever you decide in the community. Is it gonna be, it's a community decision, so is it gonna be the mental health center? Is it gonna be, who's got capacity? Is it gonna be a group effort? It's different for every one of those
Like me,
projects.
I was trying to associate the name of the facility with the location in which it is situated.
Okay.
And as I'm sitting here, understanding the conversations I had with the director at DHS years ago, or months ago, and then with the police department and with other people, and the taxpayers who I'm seeing on a regular basis now that I work in a different office, they're coming in to say, hey, I'm doing this. What do you guys talk about doing? You want to house homeless people? And they say, you get little people coming in there with a social security check with the envelope from the bank, and they're in there to pay half of their property taxes. Understand? And you want to build another facility to bring more people here that I got to feed. And to your point about which neighborhood you want it, and you got to respect those decisions for people being fearful about what this will bring, because what they see when they're going to the grocery store, I got 4 or 5 guys hanging out in front of safe entities as they scan through my mind, thinking, I'll help, but I don't want anything to do with being responsible for it.
Well, I don't think the city should, honestly.
I don't mean us, I mean DHS is probably not gonna want it, we don't have a strong enough mental health program. I know clergy is not real excited about doing it,
Sure.
you know, and there are a lot of things. And then the second question is when we have the discussion about, I'll be quick. Homeless versus, yeah, thank you. Homeless versus transient population, how are you, the questionnaire for application, are you homeless or are you transient? You know, and if you're transient, can't help you, so what do you do with those folks? It's crazy, isn't it?
I have one solution for one set of the population that we're talking about here. We are not here to solve, I wish I was that smart, but we don't know all the answers to how to solve. I know one answer for one slice of the population that is typically spent costing your communities most money, right, in emergency services. They're the ones who the police are dealing with. They're the ones who are in and out of detox and cost in and out of emergency rooms, in and out of, so that's all I'm talking about here. I can't address that.
And in trying to have an open mind and appearing to be somewhat of a smart aleck, the next comment out of my mouth is this. This morning, as I was at work and I was explaining that I was going to be coming to this afternoon, and I said, you know, it's a good thing, it may not cost, and it's something we have to do, and like that. Some of the folks I talked to said, wouldn't it be cheaper to buy them a bus ticket to Alamosa?
And that's,
You know,
that's some people, that's some people's attitudes, right?
Yeah.
I mean, we can't argue with that, right?
Those people are part of the constituents, they're part of the 8,400 taxpaying residents that live here. They have a voice, they have a right to have that opinion.
Absolutely.
And I am charged
Absolutely.
to make sure that that concern is heard.
Yeah, yeah. And I guess, you know, my response to the people standing outside of Safeway that might look scary or might be panhandling is, you know, would you rather continue to see them outside of Safeway doing that, or would you rather actually have them housed?
Good point.
And getting them services that they need, so that they're not having to go beg for money, right? So that they can actually maybe get some dignity back in their life, get a job, get some help, not have to ask for money. I mean, I don't know about you, but I think that would be so traumatic, right? To have to stand out there and beg people for money, right? I mean, if you went up to people and you really got them one-on-one and had a heart to heart with them, I bet a lot of those folks would tell you, you know what? I hate doing this, or I would rather have a different type of life, but given a chance, right? And so I think a lot of it is, has this community, I don't know, right? I can't speak for your community, but has this community offered a different alternative and a different way of living than what has been the status quo for however long it's been?
And if I make one comment quickly,
Yeah.
in response, I was at the drive-thru at Wendy's down at X11, and I was waiting to get to the window to pay and pick up my food. Anyway, I see this guy standing there on the milk box with a gas can sign, need help traveling, need assistance. Okay, this pickup truck comes screaming into the parking lot, screaming in cop talk, okay, which captures my attention.
Yeah.
And the guy makes a real sharp U-turn, the door slides open, driver door slides open, and the guy slides out of the seat and approaches the guy with the milk box. And they have this spirited conversation, as I can tell. Then all of a sudden, the guy that was on the milk box gives the sign to the other guy. The guy was on the milk box, gets in the truck and leaves. And I'm thinking, what is this? Shift change it to begging place?
And there's all kinds of stories like that out there, and that's, again, we can't address those because.
I don't expect you to, but that's what a lot of people see.
Sure.
From which they derive their opinions.
Sure. So there's just one more thing, and I'm sorry, Rusty.
No, we're fine.
I'm done.
Is if you could write down the name, everybody in Trinidad is listening right now, write down the name of a YouTube video called No Losers. It is a video that is about the project that I talked about in my hometown of Duluth, the 70-unit targeting chronically, actively using addicted people. And part of it is, these are the same folks that scared me standing outside of Safeway. And now that they're housed, they are completely, and again, they're not all sober, but it is a completely change in how they are.
Got it.
So just watch it. It's eye-opening. It talks about, it's from the police perspective and from the judges, local judges' perspective, as well as community members in general. So I just wanted to mention that, and then I feel like Rusty, we should.
All right, so have you run into one of the other communities where they had, in a rural community comparable, that may have an issue like we have with the lack of mental health services, that we're not gonna be able to tap into a resource here?
Agency. Some of it was, I'll just be honest with you, leadership change at the mental, it's not that they didn't have the potential, it's that the leadership was not there to focus on this population. So I think so the mental health agency, the good news for you all, and I know it hasn't been perfect and there's all kinds of right now, but the good news is that the same mental health agency that served down here, albeit I don't, doesn't sound like it's been all that, that level of service that we need, is the same group we're working with in Pueblo. It's just different, obviously, staff, and they are rock stars. I mean, we went and toured their facility, and so
So
we
the
would
reason
try
I
to bring
asked,
that
let
synergy.
me, I'll explain further. So my nephew in 12 years mental health service, he has serious issues. He's been on the lithium, this stuff for all this time. So every 3 months, he talks to somebody on a TV screen, and that doctor changes every 3 months, and every 3 months they change his prescriptions, and he does this major crash, and then he builds up, feels great, and then he does shit he shouldn't do, and then he's right back in the dumps again, and we deal with that. And that's our mental health facility that's available in Trinidad. We don't have a mental health facility. And we're all in meetings with the state's attorney general, and we're preaching up there. We're joining the opioid lawsuits that are going on. We're begging for medical rehab facilities. We're suffering in these fields, and that's a service. So that's why I asked what's available. Have you had, what role can y'all play in bringing mental health to service this facility if we don't have it? Is that available?
Yeah, I mean, that is, this project will not get funded, so this is the other thing to, if this is at all a reassurance. The nice thing about the pain in the butt about these funding streams, and the great thing about them, is that they know that this will not work if there isn't great mental health services. So they're not gonna give you a dime to build this until you have proven, and a lot of it's through this service planning process, so, and bringing in the mental health center, and figuring out where the gaps are and having those kind of honest conversations. And okay, so if you can't even do this, how are we gonna get you to do this? And if that means bringing in other partners from other places, I mean, we don't care, we just wanna get it done.
It's getting Health Solutions down here to Trinidad, and getting the CEO of Health Solutions down here, and getting the person who's leading the project in Pueblo down here to talk about what their capacity is, what their staffing capabilities are, and what they can do for this project. So we start there, right? We start with Health Solutions. If that's not enough, we look at what else is available. And, you know, I mean, Skype is a part of it's a piece of the puzzle, right? It's not the only one.
Right.
And so if you do not have somebody who is in that residence with the people who live there, checking in on them, this is not gonna be a successful project.
Right.
So that's where we would start, and then we would figure out where the gaps are and what else you all need to do, this community needs to do in order to get the mental health treatment there.
And I want to add to that point, we have already started to build a network relationship with Health Solutions from their Pueblo office to enhance what we have down here in this facility as part of the toolkits, because these individuals were coming to meet with the members of these teams to say, how can we help you? Is this feasible? And we had a great response from them already. Another attribute is going to be the Mount Carmel Health and Wellness Center. We've already had conversations with Felix Lopez, and he is definitely interested in this as well as for the veterans portion of that. So we have already started to make these connections with these entities that are excited about this and feel that it is a viable avenue for them as well.
You talked about the services out of Pueblo. Are they willing to place somebody down here?
These talks are still in the works, but that is, yes.
Because one of the things I know that in 2008, they did that survey, and of course, you know, we had the highest rate, or one of the highest rates in the state, of the need for behavioral services. And the biggest problem is trying to attract those providers into the rural community. That is a really, really hard thing. But the question I had is,
Yeah.
if I lived in Duluth, I would want permanent housing immediately.
No kidding, right?
I wanted
No,
to
I'm
ask
serious.
you a question, maybe you can attest to this. How have other communities dealt with having a permanent supportive housing facility before and after in their neighborhood?
So I will tell you, and I'm gonna be totally honest,
Right? It's a totally different story. So anytime you tack on the word homeless or housing instability or somebody who might have a mental health disorder or might be substance abuse using, or anytime you throw in that word, it is a stigma, right? And whether there's fact or myth to this, we can debate that all day long. But that's the thing, homeless veterans projects have received pushback. There's one in Colorado Springs right
People who
now.
have served our country, so, don't get me started, because I'm gonna start screaming about this. But, so, we've never not had pushback from neighborhoods. Now, it's to varying degrees, right? We've had some neighborhoods where we've had a neighborhood meeting and it was a love fest, and maybe a couple people said, we're concerned, but okay, this makes sense. We've had other neighbors that, in Boulder is the worst. Progressive liberal Boulder has the worst community opposition to these kind of projects.
Seriously.
So, I mean, like
I mean,
scary,
yes.
police having to escort the housing authority out of the building.
Death
Death threats.
against people who
Bad,
are
bad,
proposing to
bad.
do this, from people in
So,
Boulder.
so, I will say that the same people that were doing the death threats, well, actually, they were anonymous because they're chicken, but, the same people we can assume were doing, because they were the most vocal at those meetings, are now the biggest proponents of those projects, the project in Boulder, for example. Any project, I've never seen a project open where the neighbors have been unhappy. And again, that's back to that safeguard issue, that you have investors, you've got banks investing in these projects. There is no way in heck that they're gonna let their name be associated with something, so you're gonna have to have a property management company that has been doing this for decades and has a great reputation and knows how to do it. You are gonna have to have third-party asset managers who are looking at making sure everything in that building is fixed and up to shape. There is so much oversight with these projects that if any, I mean, and I'm not gonna say stuff doesn't happen, because stuff happens in my neighborhood too, it happens everywhere, right? So things happen, but for the most part, there is so much oversight on these projects. I'd rather have one of these in my neighborhood than I would have, well, definitely a frat house, but just about any other kind of housing, because there is so much oversight. I mean, there's a million eyeballs on these properties. We actually, one of the things that we love to do, if, again, this is another way we get the police department involved, is to put a small police substation in the building. And it's not necessarily to monitor the residents, it's to keep the predators away, right? So these are very vulnerable people, and the predators tend to know where to find the vulnerable people, the drug dealers and that kind of thing. And so we have had great success with getting some of our community police liaisons to just have a little office there, park their car, hang out with the residents, have coffee with them, rebuild that relationship that maybe wasn't always in such good shape because of the role that the cops had to play. So there's all kinds of strategies. I mean, this is definitely not, it is an art, not a science. It's really hard to give sometimes really specific answers because it depends on your community and what you want to do and how you want to put it together. But the goal is to have people housed safely and have the community want more of these projects, because it's not going to be good for anybody if they're not happy with it.
Now, do people that want to apply for the housing, are they required to agree to services
So,
before they're even put in place?
no. So in permanent supportive housing, the idea is that if you have, well, let me back up. So the services are required for the service provider, which means that mental health staff can't sit in their office playing Pokemon because services are not required for the residents. Their job is to engage those residents every single day, to be knocking on Katie's door every single day, and to be working with her in a way that is creative and engage her in where she's at. People will not lose their housing if they don't engage in services, but I will tell you that across the tens of thousands, probably hundreds of thousands of these units that now we have that have been open for 20 more years across the country, if the services are done right, people are actively using the services. If the services are being done wrong, then no, people are not using them.
The reason why I bring that up is the housing unit that we visited in January, February, that is one thing that they said that they were not required
Right.
to help or to agree to services. The services were there if they wanted to ask them, that was it.
Well, and
no one was knocking on their door like you're saying.
Yeah.
To go do the services.
yeah.
So yes, no, we are well aware of the facility that you visited in Denver, and we've also made, and they actually know where those residents are, and they're not letting them get off the hook if they've decided that they're not going to engage in services. So it is voluntary. I mean, I think we have seen programs where services are mandatory, and people end up back in jail, or people end up back on the streets, or people end up, again, cycling through after they've been taking a detox, back out on the streets. Forced services, just, I think you would agree, nobody likes to be told what to do. I know I don't. And being forced to take medication, being forced to do certain types of treatment until I'm absolutely ready is something that I'm not going to be committed to, and I'm not going to be good at, and I'm not going to make headway on. until I've read it. And we've seen that model, we've seen a lot of progress for people who have voluntarily gone into these services.
Yeah, I mean, I think the chief said it, right? That people, if you try and force somebody into treatment, it's not gonna work, but if you can get them to think that it's their idea by working with them on a daily basis and get them to want to go to treatment, that it actually does work, and that people get sober or they get to a level of sobriety that is functional, right? Because I know, I walk down my neighborhood alleys on recycling day, and there are plenty of people living in my upper middle class neighborhood in Denver who are not, I'm gonna assume have some addiction issues based on what's in their recycling bins. But so it's everywhere, right? It's in our families. I've had plenty of addiction in my family, and so the idea is that we want to do something that actually works to engage people rather than to try and force them to do something. I hate it, again, to Katie's point. Somebody tells me to do something, if I don't think it's a good idea, I'm gonna do exactly the opposite. So.
We're talking about basic human needs, food, clothing, and shelter.
You got it.
Maslow.
We got a little chart
All right,
for you, exactly.
I'm not working ahead because I don't even see the chart. But anyway, point being is we're addressing the issue of shelter.
No.
And okay, so we have a cafeteria now for food, and what do we do with clothing? You know, there's more than just giving somebody a place to live.
Absolutely.
Oh, absolutely.
Okay, there's my job as a parent to provide food, clothing, and shelter, and an education.
Yep.
Okay, and a smack whenever they need it, that's a whole nother story.
Exactly.
Okay, but,
No comment.
so how do you address the
Yeah.
huge myriad of
Yeah.
human interest, or human needs?
Yeah. And that is such a beautiful point, because what we have found with these projects is that we go in with this highfalutin idea that we're gonna fix everybody, right? We're gonna do all these employment services, and we're gonna do yoga, and we're gonna do self-actualization, and we're gonna do all this good stuff. And then we realized, to Maslow's hierarchy of needs, people need to be fed. Like, they haven't had proper nutrition for 20 years. They've maybe been living on Apple Jacks and whatever they can scrounge up at the free, whatever. People need medical care. We've had people move into some of these projects where we had one guy at the project in Duluth who's literally, he had been beat up. He had gotten, his jaw was broken. They had wired it shut. And because he couldn't make his appointments because of his mental health and other stuff, and because he was homeless, they never took it out. So the wire had grown into his jawbone. So we put him in housing, and it was like, this guy doesn't give a crap about yoga. This guy needs to go get his medical care taken.
Right.
So no, you're absolutely right, and that is something that it took me a while to learn that we need to really think about people's basic needs.
As I can imagine, not every one of these living cubicles, whatever you call apartments, is gonna have a stove, a refrigerator, a microwave, and a dishwasher.
No,
That's
not a
gonna happen.
dishwasher, but they will all have independent kitchens and independent
So that
bathrooms.
they can take care of some of that
Yes.
stuff for themselves.
But we wanna also, we would acknowledge that there are some people who who can't right now, who
Right.
are too overwhelmed with trying to deal with everything else, and so there would be some sort of food, I don't wanna say food service, but some sort of plan for how to address nutritional needs. Remember that 15-page document that I keep mentioning, that service plan?
Right.
That has every single thing you could possibly think of that somebody might need, and we're really going through as a community and addressing who would do what and what needs to happen in the building. But you're absolutely right, basic needs are most important.
Okay, are you aware of one or more individual success stories?
So many.
Tell me two.
I'm gonna tell you Betty, because this is my favorite story, Alice, because Alice is my favorite story. So at the street, chronically addicted, actively using, small units, 24-hour front desk staff, nutrition service. The other side is pretty much the same, but a little bit bigger units, slightly more independent, not as much services. So Alice moved in, she was 65. You would meet Alice and you would think she was 80 because she had been on the streets for 30 years. I mean, this woman had been, and I've known her forever because everybody knows her. She's around Duluth. She had been multiple sexual assaults. You can't imagine being a woman in a homeless situation. I don't know, 30-some treatments that never stuck. Hundreds of detoxes, in and out of the emergency room. The cops knew her, everybody knew her. People thought they were crazy to try and house her because she also had a mouth on her like a sailor and could get awfully scary at times. Alice moved into the new San Marco because that's who they were targeting. They wanted to get people like Alice off the streets because they were the ones causing the most commotion. So So Alice moved in, staff did not approach her about, do you wanna go to treatment, or do you wanna do this or that? They realized that she was very kind of distant with them because she had lost her kids to the system. She did not have a good, she didn't have good relationships with case managers. That was not her experience. So they just really figured out that the things that Alice liked to do to engage her. One of the things she liked to do is she liked to play cards. So they started asking her to play cards. So they would just sit there and play cards with Alice. And over the course of a few months, as Alice started to build trust with these staff, Alice let them know or disclosed that she had grandkids that she had never met because her kids would not let her anywhere near those grandkids because of her addiction, right? We've all seen it. Totally makes sense, I get it, right? She hadn't seen her son in 20 years. She hadn't met her grandkids. And she really wanted to try and figure out a way that she could meet her grandkids, but she knew she could not call her kids when she was drunk. And Alice had not had a day of sobriety in the last 30 years. So they first had to so staff again didn't overreact and say, oh yeah, let's get you into treatment. That would have totally freaked her out. She would have ran. Staff instead said, well, let's come up with a plan. You want to try and stay sober for 24 hours so you can call your kids. Now, this may sound like simple stuff to you guys. This is not a simple thing for somebody who's been chronically addicted for 30 years. So Alice said, yeah, let's try it. And first they had to do some medical stuff because you can't just do that after using. But anyway, they worked through the medical stuff. They came up with a plan, and staff was with her 24 hours. She said, I need you to sit outside my door while I'm sleeping, because if I get up in the middle of the night and want to use, I need you to distract me with, they came up with a plan, and they got Alice to, they got her to stay sober for 24 hours. She called her kids. Really, really hard conversation, right? Can you imagine after all this time? It was not an easy conversation. She went on a bender for 2 weeks or whatever because of her trauma from the conversation. And then she came to staff again and she said, I want to try it again. Pretty soon Alice, on her own, was staying sober, on her own decision, was staying sober for longer and longer and longer periods of time. Pretty soon the conversations with her kids got easier as she was sober for longer periods of time. She actually met her grandkids. Her grandkids, this is how safe this building is. Her grandkids started coming and spend the night. So these little kids would come into this building. That's how safe this building is. That's how confident that her kids were in this building. Her grandkids started to come to spend the night. She decided she wanted to move to the other side. Pretty soon Alice was sober. And not from going through treatment, which hadn't worked, not from any of the other traditional things. She was sober and she had made a decision about what she wanted to do. She became a volunteer in the community. She's the grandmother of that building, so if anybody gets squirrely, they bring Alice or threaten to bring Alice in. She does fry bread nights for everybody. So Alice was one of the big success stories, right? So whenever I'd bring a group of people through, which was all the time, we'd take them to Alice's room, she'd share a story, she'd sell them a ton of beadwork, she had a thriving business off my clients. And her grandkids were like living with her almost part-time. She was back connected, going on senior and elder trips with her community. So I asked her to come present at a conference for me. Staff called me 2 days before the conference and said, so does everybody agree that Alice is a success story?
Yes.
Right? So staff called me 2 days before the conference and said, just wanted to let you know that Alice is on her relapse week. We're taking her to detox tonight, so she'll be good to go. And I had a complete visceral judgment. For 5 days, every month on the anniversary of her daughter's death, she has a set 5 days that she goes and she drinks, and then we have pre-agreed, we take her to detox in 360 days a year. This is a thriving member of this community. So, in any other housing project, she would have been kicked out the first day. Well, they would have never let her in. But because staff let her in, met her where she was at.
You said that you had said that treatment is not a condition of release, but there are conditions of release, just like any other building. So if they are acting out or breaking the law or doing things, they can be kicked out for violations of those. I just want to make sure that was clear, because this isn't where you come into the lease and there's no way that you can be booted because of your behavior or anything else.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
We always forget to say that part.
Yep.
But yes, they can't do no illegal activity in the building, just regular lease like we would have.
No violence, no, and you pay your rent.
I know that, like I said, that one building that we visited, other than the violence, they were able to come and go as they pleased, and they were able to do as they pleased. Because as a matter of fact, while I was there, Michelle and I both, we asked to go to the bathrooms. I came out, the inside of our bathroom, and Michelle said the same thing, there was a box.
Yeah.
And then there was a box full of needles, and it was full in both bathrooms. So they were, and the guys said they're able to come and bring their drugs and alcohol and come and go as they please. So I said to myself at that point, you know, what's the purpose here?
The sharps container. Yeah,
Well,
yeah.
I mean, I think, so if somebody was caught shooting up, that's an illegal activity and that would have to be addressed with as a lease violation. That being said, again, part of the whole strategy is to be realistic. And if that's a project that is targeting, actually, it's the sheriff's department who gave them that list and said, these are the 65 people in our community who we have the most contact with who are homeless. So they didn't even get to choose who they housed there. They had to go out based on the sheriff's department list. And they knew that they were taking people who were addicted. And they knew that they were taking people who were gonna use drugs. If they do it in the building and they get caught there, it's gonna be addressed in a lease violation point. But they also are gonna be realistic. Would you rather have those needles laying around or would you rather have them in a sheriff's
Here's what I
container?
was thinking about though afterwards, I said, you know, could these people come in, they can bring in their drugs or alcohol, whatever, especially the drug users that are shooting up with needles. We're giving them a place to sleep. During the day, they can go out and they can rob and do whatever they want, bring their drugs in, and next day they can do the same thing to support their recovery. So basically, we're giving them a place to be able to stay at night and go out and do whatever they have to for the support they're out there. So that bothers me.
Yeah, watch that No Losers video because there's an exact, somebody says the exact same thing and I'd be curious to hear what you thought of the response that they gave to that because.
Because they've got to, they have to go out and get money to support their health somehow.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I don't know if people are getting on Social Security because they're finally getting services and they're in stable housing, if they're getting veterans benefits. I mean, I'm sure it's a whole bunch. Actually, half the people in that building are working now.
So when we left that building, matter of fact, Walt was there, we had, Michelle said basically we were accosted, the guy came, you could tell he was methed down pretty bad. And of course, he was bad mouthing the facility and he was off the charts. And you could tell he was on meth because his face was all blistered up and it was, you know, somebody would see that out in the street, scare the heck out of them.
Yeah.
Well, it's no different than going to Safeway when the one lady that needs serious medical help, that would be a ideal for this type of housing. The way she looked, the way she come at you and everything else, just as scary as the person you probably encountered at the deal. The deal is doing nothing and thinking it's gonna go away is ridiculous. The fact that we have a chance, if our community is in need, and then we may be able to help a certain amount of people, that's worth whatever. I mean, we're not paying out of pocket. We have to be willing to help those who want help. We can't look at the negatives, in my viewpoint, that'll come out of this. Everybody out you can help. I guess that's the point I'm trying to make. We have to do something.
Oh, sorry. I was gonna say, I'll be honest, there is a little bit of commitment I'm asking for on this council for this program. I'm asking for public support. You know, that is one thing because I'm of the mindset that doing the right thing isn't always doing the popular thing. And sometimes, and that's a bullet I'm willing to bite on, whether it's alone or with the whole council. I fully support this idea. I've come to learn about it. It's changed my perspectives because I used to be of the transitional housing mindset, tit for tat, and I realized that was not working in other parts of the country. The other thing I'm going to ask for is for support for getting some resources to get this survey performed so we can determine if this is something that is valuable for our community. Now, we've talked with Gary Sanford from Denver University Sociology Department, who's also part of the Burns Center. They're looking to bring down graduate and doctorate students to help perform the survey from a realistic, professional vantage point, along with other community members who are seriously interested in taking these informational or symposiums, if you will, to the trainings to get this survey performed. So it's not just one person going out, there's a group. And we're also looking to bring people into the mission here, so we can entice them to come to us, and maybe after we can perform the surveys. So those are the two things that I'm looking for.
So you're wanting to ask council for resources to pay for.
Right. Considering how we spent $20,000 on a survey for Space to Create, the survey that I'm looking to get performed here now in June would be $12,000 or less. And that's really gonna be about the most skin in this game I'm gonna ask. We put $1.5 million into the building and Space to Create another affordable housing project. This one is gonna address another population.
But that's two totally different entities, and you're talking about the dollar.
I understand that, but I'm just saying, if we're willing to put that much money into this other program, and this one is gonna be mostly paid for, if not entirely, through other fundings, I think it's something that we should at least honestly approach and take a healthy look at.
Good. Couple of comments. First of all, to your dissertation a few minutes ago when you said people who need the help. I think to Charlie's point and in my mindset is to people who want the help. That in my mind is a selling point, okay? And then to your point, that's why I'm here. It's obvious I'm not totally on board with this, I mean, and I'm very suspect, but I'm willing to learn. That's how you get better at what you do. However, when you're putting stuff out there as your role as councilman, it suggests that we have already done that. And you have to refrain from doing that. You're talking about individually as council, and it would help the furtherance of this cause in the community if we could individually sell that to the people who ask us questions, rather than create a foregone conclusion by virtue of the stuff that you put on social media about Councilman Carlos Lopez representing, and it leads the natural conclusion that people draw. City Council has already decided that. That's why I asked at the last meeting, by whose authority are we doing this? Because we're not, there is no authority granted. And we need to understand and create a legitimate awareness in the community's part that this is not something that has already been decided by council.
And
It's something that we're working on. I'm willing to support what you're suggesting, what you're doing, but at the same time, I think it's important that you, as Michelle mentioned, temper your enthusiasm in such a way and do not represent as an issue of council.
I see something. I got invited to a community assessment meeting Monday night at the hospital to assess our needs, our medical needs as a community. And I had two individuals there that are county officials that basically told me that the council this is the council's project. So I think the misinformation is out there, just for your information.
No, I understand that, and I'm
Just
sorry
for
because
your-
I tried to place out there
No,
that,
I understand.
that I was part of the
I
team and not
understand
part
it.
of the council. I said, me and
Citizen and as a member of this council feel that it's important for this community to find out what kind of problem do we have.
Right.
Do we have a homeless problem? Do we have a transient problem? It's a problem, and we're gonna have to solve it one way or the other. And I think to that point, as Mr. Matei always says, to that point, I think a survey is essential.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with that. That's where it all starts.
Yep.
You know, to a certain degree, I agree. One thing I want to mention to you, Carlos, I think you need to, a certain amount, you need to divest yourself of some of these projects yourself and put other people in the community to lead this project.
I agree fully. I am just a catalyst, and once, we've got other people, a developer is already looking to a letter of intent, which I can walk away from this, and, because I've got other things I need to do.
Well, I don't think anybody's asking you to walk away from it.
No.
I think what we're asking you to do, and it's difficult to do in this community because I forever and ever going to be known as a state trooper. I haven't been there for 11 years, but that's what people see me. Okay, and your name is, it's important to differentiate and distinguish between what you're doing as an individual and otherwise.
You know, when you put your name out there the first time around, that's kind of it's attached. It's a difficult situation.
One last point, one last piece of homework I was just gonna give to you, just back to your point, because I didn't want to forget about it, was the cost savings piece. Just wanted to point out a couple of these statistics. We've got a Denver study up here, we've got a Seattle study, and then a couple of other smaller communities, Rhode Island and Florida. But there's a great article that I would highly recommend you read, it's called $1 Million Murray. $1 Million Murray, if you haven't already read it, by Malcolm Gladwell, you may have heard of. He wrote this article in the early 2000s about a man named Murray who lived in Reno, Nevada. And Reno was up in arms about their homeless population, about how everybody, the cops, the judges, the social workers, the nurses, the hospital room attendants, the ER attendants, et cetera, all knew Murray, and he was in and out of those hospital rooms, and he was in and out of those ERs, he was in and out of jail detox his entire life. Murray spent the city of Reno $1 million, and he never got housed. So he died on the streets, he lived and died on the streets of Reno, Nevada, costing the city $1 million, and they never figured it out, right? So it's just to that point again of like, the article's great, right? It's like, we can continue, and again, I'm not pushing for this model, I'm not pushing for any model until there's an assessment that's actually done, to your point, about what is the issue, who are these people, what is the need, identifying that, I absolutely think that is the first step. But I also think just longer term, right? I mean, the longer the communities, whether it's a community of 9,000 people, or 500,000 or 1 million, the longer communities go and do nothing about the problem, the more it continues to cost taxpayers, right? So it's just, I put out the food for thought, it's a great read. And think about the Murrays, right? I'm sure you've got a Murray somewhere here in Trinidad. If you don't today, you will, or you will see those effects 30 years, 40 years.
It's interesting that you say that, because the takeaway I get from this is, how much is this going to cost the city?
Yeah.
How much is it going to cost me, the taxpayer? Well, it's costing you already.
So
Okay?
much more.
And from what you're saying, and what you just said, so I think the takeaway is, well, what's going to happen if we do this? Well, the obvious question I can respond is, well, what's going to happen if we don't do it?
Exactly, right. And the way that the system works with these projects, which is pretty nice, is because this is an easy answer too, is because of this, the way that these VI SPDAT happens, this ranking tool, is that means this project, assuming that this is who you're gonna target, is the people who are costing your community the most money, and I'm just making that assumption, but I don't know. This project has to prioritize those folks. So it's the people that score the highest on that vulnerability index that are the ones who are costing the sheriff's police and the detox. So you're not gonna be able to, it's almost, I don't wanna say it's out of your hands, but you have to take those people that are costing the most money. So no matter how you slice it, you're gonna save the taxpayers hundreds of thousands of dollars.
So it's on average about $15,000 a year, just for starters, right? So we can continue to do, per person, do nothing, and it'll cost the city about $40,000 a year to keep somebody going to the jails, going to the soup kitchens, going in and out of ERs, going into hospitalizations, sleeping on the streets, sleeping on the couches, doing the emergency services, et cetera. And if you house them with services, with support services, that costs about $25,000 a year.
Of course, is this homeless problem that we have because of what reason? Is it because it's always been and it's just the increased population? Or is it something else?
We were gonna do a whole thing on this, and then we just kind of skipped it, because this was such an interesting discussion. But, I mean, so there's a whole bunch of things that happened kind of more around the 1980s that are just starting, I think we're starting to see I think we saw a big uptick in the 1980s, and then we're starting to see it even more, to Katie's point, because it's gone unaddressed for so long. But the two big things that happen when you look at studies, and you can Google the homeless, whatever, history, but the two big things in the 80s were that the HUD programs completely changed and shut down a bunch of SROs all over the country. Thousands, hundreds of thousands of SROs that were essentially housing the people that would normally be homeless. The SRO program shut down, and they kicked people out, and so that's where you got a lot of the people that were more the single men that were maybe working day labor or whatever it might have been back in the 80s that were now homeless, and now it's how many ever years later, and if they're not passed away, then they are chronically addicted, and they're chronically mentally ill, and they're physically disabled. And the big one was the mental institutions closing. So when, who is this? I can't remember what era this was, but
Reagan.
Reagan.
Shutting down the mental institutions, right?
And
then it became a community's responsibility to take care of the very, very seriously mentally ill. And that's nationally, but if you look at the bed count of what it was in the 1980s at both Fort Logan and Pueblo, more than 65% of those beds have been lost, right? So it does affect Colorado, and it's affected Colorado probably more so or just as much as any other state around the nation, in that we've now released people who should not be on the streets, right, with no support system, and we think that the community mental health centers now are going to take care of them. And the community mental health centers were not prepared, right? At the same time, we've got health institutions that are continually losing their beds year and year and year, over and over again. And the cuts to mental health funding, which is in Colorado, has just continued to decrease over the years.
I think to the point too about we've talked a lot about addiction today. when you think about what happens to somebody who ends up on the street, they're not gonna keep taking their meds, they're gonna end up self-medicating. And so I would say 75% of people that we see, and a lot of that are out on the streets that have mental health issues also have addiction issues, and it's because they've been, instead of listening to the voices in their head telling them that they need to go hurt themselves or jump off a bridge or whatever, they're drinking their pint of whiskey a day, and that's keeping the voices at least at bay.
That's my nephew right
Yeah.
there.
Yeah.
You know, the thing about it is that the children that are traumatized to the abusers
Yeah.
of alcohol, you know, so it's kind of like, which one is it?
Yeah.
Which one do we really want? It's difficult, it's a difficult decision.
It is.
And I think, again, you know, not to keep harping on this too much, but the part of the reason we're in front of you and we're in front of all these other communities, and I should mention that this is extremely competitive funding, so part of, you know, there's 1,000 more units in communities all across the country in the pipeline, and communities who really want to do this and are moving these projects forward, but part of the reason is because the resources are there. I don't know of any other program, there's no opioid program that has this much resource that's available. So if you have, I always tell people, if you have this issue in your community, this is the time to address it because the money is there to do it. And so that's kind of where it ends up rising to the top in my mind, but you're absolutely right that there's so much need out there.
Well, that and the sustainability, long-term sustainability is the two things that concern me.
Well, we just really want to thank you for your time, and know that we are a resource and we are available. We work very closely with Gary Shaw from Carlos Reference. So if at any point it makes sense to move forward with this next step of considering bringing in some folks who are trained to do the vulnerability index, the VI-SPDAT, and to train members of the community to do that. There's a very specific sort of registry week. This is done on communities across the nation. It's very well run, it's very well organized. They can basically turn the results around within about a week and then do a community presentation if that would be something that you'd be interested in seeing. And from there, I think it will really help. And if it gets funded, I really think that would be a great model with the Sheriff's Department as well as the Health Solutions and the Pueblo Rescue Mission to really look at and talk to. And I'm sure that they would be happy to collaborate and talk about how Trinidad might be able to move something
You
forward.
know,
Business cards.
You know, to a huge degree, in a sense, it's actually out of council's hands, because this is a lot of public-private, federal money, that type of
Yeah.
stuff. So, it's just a matter of informing us as what the possibilities are.
Yeah, and I'm sorry, we don't do a very good, but yeah, the expectation, we don't want the city doing it. It's too hard, it's not your jobs, right? Your jobs are to guide and to govern. But we do want you to understand what the opportunities are out there and to hear about these. But yes, you're absolutely right, Mayor, that's a great point.
And to Anthony's point is that, the perception that the council is promoting this and pushing this is, I think, something that we have to be careful of as council. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right.
In case there's something else I think you should know, I'll call you.
Okay. Sounds good.
Thank you very much.
Thank you both, ladies.
And I want to say thank you for all the council members being here to learn what I've been learning over the past few months along with Mallory and Mr. Sun.
It is, it's only through the educating ourselves that we can, I wouldn't think that we can we're better informed to inform the public when people ask us questions.
All right, thank you so much.
Thank you, ma'am. You bet.